Oh my goodness, I'm so excited, and it's such a huge honor to have my guest here with me. I'm welcoming you to the San Diego Comic-Con at Home 2021 panel, Abolishing Traditional Ideas of Latinas through Latina Superheroes. I'm Frederick Luis Aldama, otherwise known as Professor Latinx. I published a bunch of books, including the Eisner-award winning Latina Superheroes in mainstream comics. I'm the editor of the comic book trade press series, Latino Graphics, creator of the first documentary on the history of Latina Superheroes. This fall, I cut the ribbon on my comics and multimedia art space, the Latinx Pop Lab at UT Austin. I am honored to have an extraordinary group of creators with me today to discuss abolishing traditional ideas of Latinas through Latina Superheroes that will examine and explore how the word Latina has evolved from being associated with rigid and oppressive gender roles and archaic customs to reflecting egalitarian ideals in and through storytelling shaped by comics and new media arts. I have with us today Kayden Phoenix, an award-winning film director, founder of the nonprofit Chicana Directors Initiative, and creator of A La Brava, Universe of Latina Superheroes. You can learn more about Kayden at latinasuperheroes.com. I also have Dr. Drea Letamendi, a clinical psychologist with degrees from Cornell, BA, and SDSU/UCSD PhD, currently working with students at UCLA. Drea creates new spaces of learning and wellness by bringing together psychological science and fictional heroism. Drea shares her knowledge across a variety of public platforms, from podcasts, panels, keynotes, and TEDx talks. She also serves as psychological consultant to comic book writers and other creatives. You can learn more about Dr. Letamendi at drdreapsychology.com. We also have Amanda Julina Gonzalez, a New Mexican artist and animator based in Southern California. Her experience includes story building, characters design, digital animation, and comic art. She is currently penciling Ruca, Chicana Superhero. Additionally, she is a voiceover artist and vocalist and can be heard in games including Final Fantasy, Brave Exvius, War of the Visions, and Battle Right. You can learn more about Amanda at amandajulina.com. Oh gosh, thank you all. It's my great honor to host such extraordinary panelists. Welcome. So I'm going to kick off with a question for Kayden, and then others can join in. What inspired you to become a storyteller, comics and film? Let's begin with you, Kayden.
Well, it kind of just fell into it naturally. I came from business. I majored in business after school. I did marketing, which was my major. And then I kind of fell into it just because I needed a creative outlet more than anything. It wasn't necessarily like, oh, let me just go change representation. I fell into that afterwards, of course, after I realized the industry that I was in and just started to see it in a different eyes. But it was really just, I needed my creative expression. And so I went into screenwriting because I'm LA based, and that's pretty much all I know is more film and TV, just because I was exposed to it and just grew up always constantly going to the movies, and then at the house was always musicals. And so same thing, I leaned towards film. I started screenwriting. I taught myself how to screenwrite, just, research online. And then from that, I fell into comics because that's another medium of expression as well. And that I can do independently, as opposed to just in film is, much more millions of dollars I do not have. But comics and graphic novels, I can definitely do myself. And so that's pretty much how I got into it and inspired. And then just to change, the representation, it's just obvious. Like, it's not like we need an explanation. Like, it's shown, like, females aren't, we're not counted, we're invisible. Latinas, we're invisible even less, and we get paid even less on top of that. So it's just on top of it. And so it's a very apparent, and it's just there. So it kind of goes with everything that I work on and work with.
Was there a kind of a role model for you that you talked about, this kind of moment where you're like, oh my goodness, like this, I need to, kind of move into this space. Was there a role model for you, Kayden?
My mom has always been my role model, or my superhero, as I call her. My grandma, my great aunt, just literally everyone in my family. And then musicals like Linda Ronstadt, although I do not know her. But, just like those types of people have always been my role models. And that's just strength. Like you see what they've done, like Gloria Steinman, I've been studying her recently, like way after the fact. But, it's just like that. Like you see what they've done and what they've gone through and what they set up for the next generations or the next generations. And so that's kind of like what I'm doing, and the other artists are doing as well. Like we set it up for everyone else below us. If we don't get through, then the next, then the Zoomers will get through. If not, the next whoever's below them will get through. So that's kind of how I see it. I don't necessarily say, oh, here's my role model, let me copy them per se, but everyone has had that influence on me.
Yeah, absolutely. Drea, how about you? What inspired you to become the kind of this sort of bringing all of these things together and creating new knowledge and also bringing wellness into our communities?
Well, I had noticed, I was in grad school, and I noticed that I did not see a lot of educators and leaders and, people who were visible, who looked like me, who shared my culture. And I think a lot of us, as we, whether you're in education and business and science and arts, we're seeing, as Kayden said, this invisibility. And yet we know that we are we're thriving, we're quite a community, and we are consumers of many of the arts and sciences, and we're also educators. But I noticed that I didn't see that representation, and I sort of wanted to make a difference outside of academia. So once I finished my PhD and once I completed the licensure, I went ahead and started to forge opportunities for myself that would bring that science into spaces and bring that visibility into spaces where I felt it was much needed. And for me, that work really was around the popular culture, in particular comics, the comics narratives, and my field of mental health. And so in that intersection, what I do is I talk about the stories that are resonating for our community, stories about resilience, stories about embracing culture, stories about mental health. And as a psychologist, I found that I can be in those spaces with confidence and also bring in, important information that I hope people are embracing, information about how to stay resilient and well, information about, identifying the need to ask for help, and overall this embracing of our holistic wellness. And so more or less, like I'd say that I am more of a bridge, that I notice arts and culture, and I notice these amazing stories, and I try to bring people into that world through the work that I do.
Wow, yeah, inspirations, carving new paths, really incredible. Amanda, let's hear from you.
On a different end of the spectrum, I watched a lot of Disney growing up. I became a storyteller because I grew up dancing, I grew up singing, and I grew up drawing, and kind of the marriage of all of those things is animation. So the longest, like the thing I've always wanted to be as long as I can remember was an animator. That's what I went to school for. And storytelling wise, I think what really kind of pushed me in the direction I'm going in now is, as soon as I left New Mexico, suddenly all of my stories started being about New Mexico, and I was exploring my identity in so many different avenues. So a lot of the time, even if I'm making a story about something that isn't necessarily about being from New Mexico, being Latina, that's still the basis of everything I want to say. So I was really inspired to become a storyteller just because that's there's an authenticity in my own stories and my own experiences that I really wanted to reflect, because I wasn't seeing it anywhere else.
Wow, yeah, so important. And this leads nicely into our sort of next part of our conversation. Really, it's teaching and role modeling. So in so many different ways. Amanda, you just talked about the kind of significance of kind of reclaiming and making sure stories that are set, you know, in and around your experience and the experiences of others in New Mexico. And that, of course, becomes so important for our communities, our readers, and for readers that might not have any idea of the richness of that experience. But teaching for all of you, right? I mean, that's just, it's kind of it's like Spidey with the Spidey webs. It's just something we do. It's so much a part of us. And it doesn't always necessarily have to happen in classrooms, traditional classrooms. It can be podcasts and TEDx talks and all of the above and more. Drea, would you like to kind of launch us on this part of the conversation about teaching, its significance, disseminating, you know, knowledge about comics, in your case, wellness as well is so important?
Well, there are two aspects of this that I enjoy. One is the response that I get from young learners and young professionals. For the most part, a lot of what I do at UCLA is student facing, and whether it's a workshop on how to deal with pandemic stress or a seminar, a dialogues about racial healing, what I try to do is build connection and community among the young folks that I work with. But I've noticed that the responses I get often privately will say things like, you know, thank you for sort of representing a culture that I don't often see, or I especially for Latina first gen students, they'll tell me, you know, because I see you in, you know, in a place of visibility, in a place of empowerment, in a place where I feel like you're making decisions and you're part, you have a seat at the table. My cat's here, apologize for that. That response has been incredibly powerful because it tells me that they are not only seeing themselves in these roles of leadership, but they also feel this sense of validation. You belong here. You're a part of this community, just like your white counterparts. And I think even for an institution like UCLA, which is, you know, very liberal and very open-minded, the remnants of white supremacy ideology continue to impact education. And I think that's a huge part of my role. The second piece is the storytelling. The first TEDx talk that I gave was about my imposter syndrome as a Latina in a PhD program and feeling as though I didn't belong. And I used comics narratives to help the audience understand that the ways that I connected to my passion and to my goals and my authenticity was through fictional narrative. That's where I saw my belonging. That's where I saw places of opportunity. And I was able to use storytelling through those talks. One recently during the pandemic, I did a TEDx talk remotely during the pandemic, and it really was about how storytelling can help us heal and thrive even during times of crisis. So those are the places in which I think I feel sort of empowered and competent in harnessing those mental health aspects and in inviting audiences to think about those concepts.
Wow, yeah, so important. The bridge building, the community, the connecting, and then of course, storytelling for us as that place of not just refuge, but of possibility that we so rarely see. Amanda, how do you see yourself? You talked about role model, in a way, the work that you do as kind of out there as yourself as a role model, but how do you see your work as maybe teaching?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm still sort of transitioning out of the mindset of a student. I graduated in 2019. I went back to school pretty late. And yeah, I guess as far as my work goes, it's something that I'm really not used to thinking of in terms of like, how can this be a role model? Like seeing little girls, like Kayden will send me pictures. She'll send me pictures of little girls holding the comic book. And that's like wild to me. I'm like, a little kid is reading what I've done and she's looking at it. And that makes me think about my work with more intention, just in terms of like how I'm drawing things. And also, you know, like writing things. When I collaborate with Kayden, it's a wonderful process. And sometimes like I'll look at something and be like, oh, I could draw it this way, or maybe I'll tweak this line a little bit. Like whenever I do stuff like that, it's just really helpful to think about like in terms of the flow of the narrative and what small things can mean. Because as an artist and a consumer of media, I'm always picking up on like the really small things that I don't know. I feel like, you know, we see ourselves in such small spaces, and it's kind of figuring out how to bring that bigger. It's kind of a vague answer, but it's interesting just in terms of like, you know, if I'm drawing a background character, what kind of background character am I drawing? So that's on all very small ways, but I am very excited, like as I'm going in my artistic career, to start branching out into being, again, more intentional, and also just like kind of learning where my role is as a mentor to, because even as like an elder to, I'm not Gen Z, but I went to school with a lot of Gen Z kids. So like as a tail end millennial, interacting with them, that was already something that I was like, oh, it's interesting to see kind of how my work and like where, not even just my work, but as a person, where I can influence and pull people along. And I think like something that's really wonderful has always been Kayden says, you know, bring people up with you. So having that opportunity has been, I think like the most amazing thing, has been able to extend my hand to my peers and say like, you know, here's your first professional opportunity, come work with me. So that's where my experience has been so far.
Yeah, so beautiful. So important to articulate that the concept and practice of intention, and also, you know, readers, viewers of our work, because so often, as you all know, the kind of media industrial complex, its primary readership is not us and our community. So thank you, Amanda. Kayden, how about yourself?
In regards to teaching, that's a lot of things, but my main thing is lead by example, because that's the way I learned a lot. I like my mentors that I don't know and I do know, like I literally see what they've done and what they said, and you know how they act and they react to all the sexism and all the racism, right? And so it's leading by example. Like I look, you know, I look up to them. And so like Mano was saying, you know, like you bring people with you. Why? Because I believe in equality, I believe in diversity, I believe in representation. So there's Latinas on the page and then behind the page as well, right? We're a full Latina team. It's a Latina Superhero universe. Why wouldn't I hire Latinas, right? Because they know the job the best. They understand the job the best. They understand literally everything about it and the importance behind it. Like I didn't have to explain Jalisco and the femicide, right? Because we're all Mexicanas and Chicanas. They understand it instantly. And so it's that type of mentality, like they would do the job the best because it means the most to them, as well as they do quality work, as well as like, why wouldn't I hire a Latina? You know, and it's just all that stuff that goes into each other. So it's really easy in that sense. And then it's also, you know, like I said, you lead. So like, if I can hire Latina, why can't you hire Latina? You know, and it's that very easy thing. Like it hasn't mean, you know, because here's their work. If you want to see their portfolio, here's the book that is in Barnes and Nobles, you know, all this XYZ stuff. But it's very important for the younger generations to see as well. Like Amanda and I go to colleges and we go to really high schools a lot. Also like a Euclid, like an elementary school as well. You know, we talk about diversity. We talk and we teach them how to make comic books. How do they have to create their own comic character, and it's anything that they want, but like we break it down and like, and here's a female, here's not a straight white male, you know, and it's just that little change in prerogative because they're not used to it. And so like, that's the whole, like, we're teaching you by literally existing, by literally, you know, and like, obviously support, but like we exist, all of us here, we exist. And that's enough of its own like revolution, if you will, because we didn't exist back then, or we didn't have the opportunity back then. We did exist back then as well. And so like, that's the progress. And so that is pretty much how we teach, besides your own words and like the words in the book and the themes of the book as well, which has its own importance. But it's pretty much this, it's just the visibility factor. Here's a female superhero. Here's a female villain, you know, because it's balanced and it makes sense. Why wouldn't you have a female villain or a Latina villain? And it's the same thing. And so that's kind of just all the teaching. Like that's just an extra layer, which is just, you know, it's a positive the way I see it. Besides, you get a great story that you get to read.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, so much. My brain's going crazy here. So inspired by the three of you. Um, how do you see your work intervening in terms of gender politics, culture, history, and politics generally? In a way, we've kind of been getting at that, but um, the second part to that is this a fair question to ask of comics and multimedia arts? And by that, I mean, sometimes we don't want, at least with the white readers and audiences, we're always put in the position of teaching, right? And sometimes we're like, no, I don't actually, maybe most of the time, we're like, no, I'm putting this out there for first and primarily for our community. And if you want to do the work and jump on board, cool. But I want to just throw this out there, and you can take it any way you want, but maybe we could begin with Drea on this one.
Well, I think it certainly depends on the creator and the artist and some of their intentions. I absolutely agree that the story that you want to tell authentically should be centered, around your, your inner motivations and your lived experience. And the point isn't necessarily to raise consciousness. And yet, I think, given what Kayden's described, we know that we are also in this political, cultural climate that that almost insists that art say something. So, as a psychologist, I've always or often made it clear that I'm not necessarily here to create the art, but I'm here to help folks, the community, better understand how they can relate, connect, and even find healing from it. And so if that means, for instance, talking about works of Latina creators in order to help, raise consciousness, in order, right now we're experiencing, I think, a raising of consciousness around anti-racism in the US in particular. And, I work in a very large educational institution, and I've noticed this interest in increasing awareness and being open. And yet I often feel as though it's the Latina experience that continues to be invisible throughout these conversations. So in that regard, I do feel as though there is a sense of responsibility to draw people to the spaces and the dialogue that are going to help them understand my lived experience. And so I think, it just has this relationship to the intention of the professional or the artist, as well as this sort of bigger community level need. So, I hope that answers the question, but I think it's kind of both and, that this work needs to be out there so that we gain visibility. But is there a need of continued dialogue and the upliftment of identities? Yes, especially because of the history of oppression, invisibility, and erasure.
Thank you, Drea. Kayden, why don't we let's hear from you.
All right, so I don't believe it is my job to teach anything to anybody, particularly non-white people, or just white people, sorry. It's not my job. I am a storyteller. You don't go into the movie theaters to go learn an education. You go for entertainment, right? And that is the same thing as comics. You go for entertainment, you go for the escapism. Now, if you happen to learn something out of it, that's the extra layer and that's a bonus, right? Like Jalisco has the Andalitas, Jalisco has Malinche, Jalisco has the femicide, which is Mujeres de Juarez. That's the extra layer that if you want to delve deeper into it, great. Like Black Panther, people started reading Black authors, people started buying Black Panther. Great, that is a great response. But why? Because it was a great movie and you were entertained and you were moved. And so that works. It was not their job, obviously, and the same thing for everything. It's not necessarily anyone's job as a creator to go and teach. It is your job to be authentic as possible, to tell a great story, to have universal themes, right? Like my things, even though it's femicide or it's trafficking or domestic violence, there are universal themes that just everybody can go with and everyone can understand, because that's the basis of a good story, regardless of your color or your gender or your sexuality or anything, identity, and so in that regard, cool. Like, I am a storyteller and that is what I'll do. I just happen to be Latina. They just happen to be this, this, and this, right? And so that's the extra layers that I keep talking about. So no, it's not necessarily our responsibility to teach. It is our responsibility to be authentic and true to the content as much as you can. I do agree with that. In regards to intervening with the white status quo, same thing, we're alive, we're already disruptors. You know, like, that's the whole thing. Like, we are fighting to exist. Like she's saying, like Drea was saying, like, Latinas we don't get talked about. Even though you talk about every other race, like, we're the #1 ethnic diversity in the United States. We're like 80% of California. You know, like, we still do not get spoken about. And that's the problem, is our invisibility. Same thing with Native Americans. Like, you Google the word Cherokee and you get a car instead of the Native American, you know, like, it's stuff like that that's really sad. And so, like, where is our justice? Where is this? Like, we have to talk about it, because it is, not because it's our job, but because we exist and we're just still fighting to exist. And that.
So powerful and so true, unfortunately. Amanda.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's just about, like, I guess, like, I wouldn't even say how is it intervening. I think that just by telling authentic stories that are specific to your own experiences and to creators' experiences, that existence is proving so much. And it's both, existence is not political, and also art is political. You know, it's like they live side by side and they're both true. And I think it is absolutely fair to ask of any type of media, you know, what are you doing? Just in terms of, like, thinking about, you know, what are you representing and how are you representing it? And I think it's an interesting question too, because I work in comics, but I also work in animation. So a lot of what I've been doing has been collaboration. And when you're working on other people's stories and other people's, you know, journeys, and a big part of it is making it, you know, where do you have to make the concessions? Where do you have to say, like, well, the big guys want this, and they said that this is more marketable or something. I haven't run into that personally, but I know at some point I will. I think that it's just important to stay grounded and to remember, you know, what is this work saying? And, like, just even in terms of, like, this was like last week, I'm working on a really cool project, and the character designer had a couple of designs for a character that I was like, wait, like, she had hair coming out of her hijab, and I was like, I don't have a lot of experience in that, but let me double check. And I just messaged her and I was like, hey, I think that this is technically haram. Like, maybe that's a conversation to have. And the character design ended up being more specific to a woman of Muslim, you know, culture and religion. And I was like, it's just like the small things like that, where it's important for your own story to be authentic and to be thinking about those things, but also in whatever place you're working in. And I guess it always is, you know, like, choose your battles and stuff, but it's just so important to remember, again, who's going to be looking at this, and it's who's going to feel seen and who's going to feel misrepresented or not seen. It's all really important.
Yeah, Amanda, thank you. All of you, actually. This was so enlightening. I think also this, you know, like, do your homework. Like, even our own communities, there are things about our communities we don't know, but, you know, make sure you get it right. You know, it gets to that point you guys were making about authenticity. The media industrial complex, the comics industrial complex, etc., the mainstream doesn't do their homework, obviously. And there's a real laziness, carelessness, and often sometimes I wonder if it's just a bunch of white dudes in a room writing based on, like, reruns of Speedy Gonzalez or something. But I want to ask all of you here, your experience as entertainment and how this and media have shaped your viewpoint as a woman of color, and how that influences the direction within these industries. Amanda, I know you've just kind of, you know, concluded one question, but maybe we can just jump off here. I know you work in comics and animation and also do the work with the voice performance and acting. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. what I immediately think of is something in voiceover specifically. This happened to me like a month or two. I got tagged on Twitter for some kind of casting call, and it was looking specifically for women of color. So, you know, I clicked it and I looked at it. And what was really interesting to me is that it was looking for actresses of Hispanic descent with authentic non-American accents. And it just really, I didn't end up auditioning for it, but it just really gave me pause, because what is an authentic Hispanic accent? Being from New Mexico, is the way I talk not authentic because it is an American accent? I did not learn Spanish growing up. That was something my parents, for their own reasons, did not want for my sister and I. And that's like a big thing for me in my life right now, as, you know, like a third gen Mexican American. But that kind of thing is just really interesting to me, because it really does sort of like, where do we fit in the media? Where do we fit in these industries? And, you know, how do we find that balance? Because I didn't end up auditioning for it because I was like, well, I don't think that these guys know even what they want. And I didn't, you know, say anything, but I thought that was just kind of funny. So it is like where I'm definitely learning all of these things as I go. And I think kind of the biggest thing is just, I feel like it's just like so important to be like constantly reaffirming that we are not a monolith, that my experience does not speak for other people's experiences, and that that's okay, because the authenticity comes from my specificity, and that's just one story. And it's important that we don't all speak for each other, and that, you know, there's room at the table for all of us, that it isn't just about, you know, oh, they're representing, like, these people are getting really represented, but these people aren't. Like, it's just, we all have to be reminding that, okay, this is one specific experience and this story is about one thing, but it's not representing, you know, like I can't possibly authentically represent, you know, like a Puerto Rican story. And if I do my research, that's one thing, you know, but it's just like, that's not my specific story. So I don't come to me saying like, can you represent this? This is you, right? And I think that's just kind of where the difference is, because all experiences are valid and there's no right way to be Latinx or Latina or Latina or Latino. And the fact that like, that's also a thing that people get really caught up on, that argument comes up on Twitter every once in a while. And I'm always like reading it and laughing, because that's not it. You know, it's what we're all, whatever we're comfortable with, but that's not where the conversation, that's not the bottleneck.
Yeah.
Gotta keep moving.
So smart. Thank you, Amanda. Drea?
I've had some positive experiences in the industry, thankfully. In 2019, an DC animated movie came out called The Justice League versus Fatal 5. And I was asked to do the commentary work because the film featured Jessica Cruz experiencing some mental health symptoms of anxiety and kind of emerging as a young superhero, but facing a lot of imposter syndrome and anxiety. I mean, I could relate to that quite a bit. So I was asked to come in and just provide helpful language, and honestly, I think to give a face to the phenomenon of some of the mental health symptoms. And yet I felt as though their choice was just very inclusive, you know, that they reached out to me in particular, that they knew I was familiar with comics, and that they also knew that I could help people understand the, you know, kind of what Amanda's saying, right? Like, there is a ton of intersectionality and multiple facets of a single person's lived experience. And I think the expectation from me was, can you sort of speak to that? That Jessica Cruz is not just Latina, and she's not just somebody with a mental health disorder, and she's not just somebody with imposter syndrome, and like help audiences understand why her significance really means a lot in this Justice League story. And that was a really good, obviously I'm a huge fan of this work, but I felt as though uplifting that experience was a really good choice for Warner Brothers and DC. Do they always make that decision? And in fact, I think probably not. But I was really embracing the fact that they were celebrating her identity in this way. And it means a lot that I was a part of that.
So important and amazing that they did that. I'm heartened to hear that they did that. They reached out to you. We all know Coco was like a smash hit because they like, okay, we've got to actually talk to our Latinos in the community and like make sure like, oh, it's not a wooden spoon, it's a chancla that gets thrown, right? Kayden, tell me how you kind of thought about this question.
Can you repeat the question? Because what I was thinking, so they answered differently. So I'm thinking I answered it incorrectly in my head.
No. In fact, Kayden, if you just want to kind of go with whatever was going on in your mind, that's cool too.
Oh, well, my rants. I'm going to rewind this later and watch it. But my rant was pretty much that, like, I'm very lucky because I was so sheltered and in my mind, very, very sheltered as well as just physically sheltered. And so, like, when I watched movies growing up, I did not see a difference in regards to, like, gender or race or literally anything. And so like 90s, right? We had all the great action movies of the 90s. We also had all the great Disney animation movies as well. So like that is what all my superhero books are about. Like they're action packed and they're all female, like, and it makes sense to me. And visually, like you look at them, they look like Disney, and so it's that combination of it. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm not included because I'm a little kid watching this stuff, and for whatever reason, it just didn't run like I'm aware I'm a girl, but like it didn't make, it was like, oh, cool, action hero, or, like obviously Sigourney Weaver in anything, and so like Long Kiss Goodnight, great movie, and it stands the time, or just literally anything, Aliens, like, so those were always my references because that was my influence. I had a lot of influences growing up, but like musicals, Disney animation, of course, and action-packed movies. That was my 90s for me. And so that is pretty much all that I do, right? My next universe is Latina princesses because I understand princesses for that reason, or at least I think I do. And so that is that. And also like the whole equality thing, like my mom raised my brother and I very equal. Like he did the dishes one week, I did the dishes next week. We had 3 chores each. On the Saturdays, we had to clean a bunch. We cleaned a lot of the house. And so like, it was very equal no matter what we did. And so that was kind of why I was just like, it's not a big like, wow for me to be like, of course she's a female lead. Like not even strong, because that's just dumb. You don't say that with male leads. You don't say strong male lead. You only say strong female lead, because it's already indicative that the female's not strong, and that's the stupidity of it. Like she's the lead, of course she's strong. She's going to overcome everything. That's all leads, regardless of gender. And so that's the background that I come in. So that's when I came into this world, like the entertainment industry and I'm the comic on the side, I guess. It's just like a weird, like, what do you mean she can't do something? What do you mean? What do you mean anything? Like all my questions all the time was just always, why not? And so it's like, why can't she be this, or he or she, and so that's my base, and that's what I thought you were talking about in the question, and my mind went that way. So that's my little rant, but it's literally like, in my mind, I was raised very equal, and like, I like to think that I live in an equal world, and obviously we do not, but I like to get us there, at least someone in the mindset, at least to fight for it, like, why not? I just think, why aren't we equal is always my thing.
As we wind this down, and really like this has been so incredible for me. One of the questions is about an earth-shattering experience you've had with comics or comic book films or comic book audiences. But I was wondering, as we've been talking, getting back to the topic of the panel, was there for you all a moment when, I don't know, your mamas were like, comic books, what? Or Kayden, you were talking about how it's very egalitarian already in your household. But one of the questions about the topic of the panel is, kind of Latinas then and Latinas now, and kind of how comics and the comic book medium in all of its ways that it's in the world has opened possible new spaces. And I just wonder if there was if we could relate this earth-shattering experience question to a generational, earth-shattering moment. Drea, do you want to throw us in the deep end here?
What a deep question. I grew up reading Mafalda and Condorito and Spanish language comics from Central and South America. And so in the household, I'm realizing as an adult, there was a huge embrace of sequential art. And my parents were definitely not artists. They were immigrants from South America in health fields and really experiencing a huge sort of decrease in socioeconomic status coming to the States. So I think that's something that's very familiar for first generation immigrants in the U.S. And they brought with them and encouraged a lot of reading. And that's, I think that was something that I just kind of grew up loving. I can relate to an earth-shattering experience. As an adult, I consulted on a comic book for DC. Gail Simone is a writer who's been just a tremendous force in writing female characters for DC Comics, and she asked me to consult on a book about Batgirl receiving psychotherapy and recovering from trauma. And she surprised me by writing a character in the comic that was me, Dr. Drea Letamendi, a clinical psychologist, Latina woman who is serving in the role of an expert, a person of power, a person advising and counseling a superhero. And what a tremendous moment, really bigger than that. Like, I just really cannot even articulate how important that is to see a woman of color in this non-villain position, really aligning, being an allyship with female superhero. And I think that was sort of a moment that helped my family understand, I mean, what do you do? Like, you're a psychologist, you do like comics, like they didn't really understand it. And I think that helped them really truly see that this connection to the comics world and to fictional narrative was meaningful, and it had such an impact, and like I could show on paper sort of the manifestation of this professional work. And I think that's a really meaningful connection to the way that I was raised.
Thank you, Drea. Amanda.
Yeah, it's funny because the earth-shattering experience for me is going to college. And I think that that's something that, like, because for me, I'm very privileged. My parents had the opportunity to work really hard. They were able to, provide for my sister and I what they didn't have growing up. And so for them, it was, absolutely important that we received an education. And my sister, went to the University of New Mexico for engineering. And it's not that my family was not involved in the arts, especially from my dad's side. There is so much creativity stemming from there for me, but it was, kind of understood, like, that's the side thing. You need to do well, and you need to be able to survive. And the arts is not that. So being able to even just like, because I dug my heels in and I dropped out of UNM. I was like, no, I want to go to art college. So I'm not gonna, like, this is, I know I want to go to, I know I want to animate. I know I want to be an animator, and I can't get that education here. I tried. And I went to like one of those like scam art schools. And that was, I think, like a really unfortunate experience that really kind of proved like, there's so many ways that, especially, Latinx people are disadvantaged. And for me, like, I already had a lot of privilege, and then my parents understood the value of education because they both went to college, but they didn't find that value in the arts because they didn't really have a foundation for understanding that. And part of that was, I couldn't point to anyone. Cartoon Network hadn't even had a female showrunner yet. Disney still hasn't had a female director. Pixar kicked Brenda Chapman off her own movie. Like, so it was just like having no basis for being like, no, look, people can do this. It was always like, yeah, guys can do that. you know, but it just didn't even seem like a possibility. So for me, the earth-shattering moment was when my parents finally were like, okay, fine, you want to go to college? Let's sit down and figure out how we're going to make this work. And I don't know, I think that that's kind of part of, for me, that's part of my, you know, cultural experience, was even just being able to say I got to go to college for art.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Kayden?
I'm gonna go with, I haven't had my earth-shattering experience yet, in hopes that I haven't had it yet. But otherwise, like in regards to comics, like Drea was saying, like I had the complete opposite. Nobody read comics. We're very movies and TV. Like we went to see the movies every weekend with my grandparents. Like it didn't matter what was out. Like we saw 2 or 3 movies, right? Because that's my film school was just going to movies with my grandparents growing up. And so like that was my world. It's very, very feature and film. That's why I keep defaulting that. But like comics, I learned comics. I had to, obviously, when I researched and I was like, I'm going into comics, research the world. And so that was that. And same thing, like when I first brought home my first book was Jalisco, my grandma, I came in with one box because I couldn't carry everything. And then my grandma was like, oh, here you are. And she gives me money. And I say, no. And she gives me money anyway. And then she goes right to this table and she starts down and she sits down reading it. And she's never read a comic in her life. And she didn't understand it. She read it 3 times because she doesn't understand comics. But like, it was just the point of it was really cute. And like, I had to go explain it to her, you know, how to read it, and just very easy, simple stuff that we understand. But like, she's never had that. I've never had that either, honestly. I had to teach myself, of course. But like the fact that my grandma will read my comic first and, you know, and drop everything, and then she'll read it 3 times. She won't get it, and I have to explain the theme and different little things, which is fine. You know, and then she'll read it again. She's like, okay, great, I get it now. And she reads it again, and then she asks me questions. And so that is my favorite. It's not earth-shattering, but it's just very much my favorite. Like, people grow. Like, same thing, comics wasn't part of my world. Now I'm reading comics. I just ordered Paper Girls, all 5 volumes actually. And so like, it's just that now I'm researching. Now I do enjoy reading comics as well. But like, that is, we grow with the times. And so even my grandma, a 79-year-old lady, can read comics. And that's just amazing to me.
So powerful, and speaks to what you've all been sharing with us today about, you know, the power of storytelling as a way to connect. So incredible. Well, sadly our time is up, but I would like each of you, if you don't mind, to share once again your website, so folks know how to learn more of your work. Kayden, would you like to?
Yeah, so my website is LatinaSuperheroes.com, and my Instagram is the exact same handle, Latina Superheroes.
Drea?
My website is drdreapsychology.com, and folks can interact with me on Twitter and Instagram at ArkhamAsylumDoc.
Amanda?
My website is amandajulina.com, and both my Twitter and Instagram handles are also Amanda Julina.
It's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have been with the 3 of you. I have learned so much, and I'm so inspired. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.